Set up a little quicker than I thought. Let me just get everything adjusted here. Perfect. Get the old microphone in there. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Everybody good? Let's get a couple of things set up here. I gotta clean my desk off. It's all messy. Oh, what's up, Tyler? You're here early. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I'm just doing a little live stream since I've got the night off, and I'm pretty stoked about 2,500 subs. Yay! Sure, we'll be at 3,000 here in next to no time. Seems like the channel's growing pretty quickly, and I'm pretty tickled about it. Well, thank you. Figured I'd come on and read some holiday stories. I'll give it a few minutes, see if we can't get some more people in before I get started. So, how's everybody doing? You guys having a good Halloween? Hopefully, you guys have been enjoying the stories. I've got a longer one coming on about I think it's about 8:30, so here in about 30 minutes. I'm sure our live stream will kind of bump up against that a little bit, but that's okay. We'll get to it when we get to it. Tired. It's been a long day. Went and saw that new Five Nights at Freddy's movie today. I won't spoil anything for you, but if you're a fan of the lore, it was a pretty good movie. I don't know it as well as some people, but I liked it. Got some Halloweeny stuff to do tomorrow. My oldest son was in a play which I went and saw last night, which was a lot of fun. So just really enjoying the off weekend and doing a lot of Halloween stuff. Well, my youngest is a fan too, and we were kind of checking it out to see if we could take him. I think it'd probably be okay. It's not real scary, like not like real scary. Like I think if you've got like kids over maybe like the age of 8 or 9, they'd probably be fine to go to it. Not really a lot of language or anything. I didn't really see anything in it. Nothing to write home about. Got a few more people coming in. Anybody doing anything fun for Halloween besides, going out and trick or treating? Okay, hello, Kelly. Oh, well, thanks. Thanks for stopping by. We're just gonna read some stories and kind of hang out and have some fun. Oh, something to drink later. This live stream is brought to you by Arizona. If they want to send me some money, that'd be great. I drink like a metric ton of their stuff. I've actually got a funny story about Arizona green tea. When I worked at the prison, they told us we couldn't bring any in because they had found an inmate making body armor out of it. I like Pure Leaf too, but it's hard to beat that 99-cent price tag. I mean, and all I could do when I saw it was like, oh, I drink like 3 of these a shift for the last 3 years. At least half of that is probably made out of stuff I brought in. But no, I like me some Arizona. I usually get the jugs, but the cans were on sale at Winn Dixie. All right. Looks like we're getting a crowd coming in. I figured about the 5-minute mark, I'll start reading some stories. Hello, April on Halloween. That's what we're doing tomorrow night. Is we're going to do a haunted trail. There used to be a really good one up from my house, but after we had a pretty nasty hurricane about 5 years ago, and it really wrecked the place. So they just don't do it anymore. It's a shame, really, because it was a lot of people looked forward to it. Like you had to get there at sunset, or you weren't going to ride it before 9:30. The line was huge. No. I chose to leave the prison. The overtime was just getting a little too wild. Um, I'm sure they would. I work at the jail now, so I'm sure they would have asked me if that was the reason. Ooh, full size candy bars. I'll have to drag my kids over to your house. We live kind of like catty corner to like a pretty upscale neighborhood, and they usually have like just like the choicest candy handouts. I've got to work that night, so I'm sure the wife will have to drag the kids out. Oh, haunted trails are a lot of fun. I miss the ones we had up in Georgia. Me and my brother used to volunteer at the one up at the state park every year, and it was a lot of fun. I miss it sometimes. It's a little harder to do it around here. Like you've got to be part of some of the groups to get the emails. Well, let's see. Um, in the spirit of the season, I guess we'll read from Fall Frights and Winter Chills. Does anybody have any particular favorites? The Stragview 10-man incident. There is a new Stragview story that I'm working on, and I've started writing on the Dr. Winters Stragview crossover, so that should be fun. I don't know when any of that's coming out, but I'm sure we'll get to it next month. We'll uh we'll run some votes next week and see what you guys want to listen to. I've been working on a lot of cool stuff this month in my downtime. Not as much as I would have liked to, but working on a little bit of stuff, trying to get my trying to get my backlog brought back up again. Let's see. What can we read? What can game for anything? Oh, all the way from Oregon. I'm in Florida, so that would be a heck of a drive. What's up, Indulge? Ah, good for you. I'm hoping here coming up I won't have to juggle you guys on work anymore because I can just kind of like stop going to work. But we'll see how that works out. Let's see. A little bit. I probably still sound a little bit kind of I forget the word, but probably sound a little bit rough still. I've been kind of trying to get over it. Nose is still congested, but that's nothing new. I've got year-round allergies. I'm allergic to everything that grows in Florida, so it's rough sometimes. Oh, well, how about Smash-O Lanterns? Anybody remember that one? That's a fine Green Man story there. All right. Well, Jeffrey hated jack-o'-lanterns. This was a problem since his hometown was known as the jack-o'-lantern capital of the United States. Every year, the town was host to thousands, if not millions, of the carved horrors. It had become a point of pride for the small Midwestern town. The town had been full of pumpkins since its founding back in the 1800s, and the town was filled with glowing, grinning pumpkins during the cold months. No citizen had to pay for pumpkins, and Jeffrey was pretty sure that it came out of their taxes, along with road work and the police force. Let's see. Jeffrey had grown up carving, eating, and hating pumpkins with a red hot fury. As a child, the glowing gourds had frightened him. His parents were never sure why, but he was terrified of them. Until he was 7, Jeffrey had refused to even carve one, and he remembered getting in trouble several times for pushing them off the front porch. It never stopped a new one from appearing where the old one had been, but they always came with a stern talking to about wasting pumpkins. Pumpkins were a hot commodity in the town and were not something to be squandered. By the time he was 17, his fear had turned into a deep hatred, a hatred that he had brought with him, a hatred that had brought him to this moment. Green Man stories are some of my favorites too. Oh, Arkansas is another one for growing things. I didn't have it as bad in Georgia, but it's definitely bad here. Hey, what if we pulled a prank on Halloween? Like a big prank. Chris looked up, cigarette smoke curling over his face, and Kevin leaned over his handlebars and grinned stupidly. What kind of prank? Asked Chris, the cigarette hanging from his mouth like a modern day cowboy. Chris was your typical greasy teenage troublemaker. He was decked out in a leather jacket, ripped jeans, black boots, and a constant need to smoke the cigarettes he usually lifted from his old man. Chris likely believed himself to be some kind of badass, and Jeffrey had seen him make good on it many times. Chris was often the most stable of Jeffrey's friends, and he made quite the contrast to the grinning idiot leaning on his handlebars. Something big, something that'll never be forgotten around here, Jeffrey said, grinning hugely. Jeffrey was watching them unload a wagon of pumpkins from the greenhouse as they loitered on the commons. Jeffrey wanted nothing so much as to watch them all become compost. Maybe some soap in the fountain again? Kevin suggested. Kevin was the polar opposite of Chris. If Chris was a greaser, then Kevin looked like a generic Chad. Blonde hair, blue eyes, tap out t shirt, gold chains, wind pants, and lots of pictures on his phone of his well crafted physique. Kevin and Chris had been Jeffrey's friends for a long time, but the truth was that he mostly just used them as muscle. He wanted them on his side in case things went south, and something like this had the potential to go very wrong very quickly. No, Kevin, something a little bigger this time. I'm thinking about smashing some of the pumpkins on Halloween night. Kevin grinned, but Chris raised a pierced eyebrow at him. Are you kidding? You know how anal this town is about their damn pumpkins. If we go around people's houses and smash up the jack-o'-lanterns, it's not I'm not just talking about the ones on people's houses. I want to smash all the pumpkins. The ones at the houses, at the shops, and the display on the commons too. The two of them looked at him in stunned silence. For those of you just joining us, we're reading Smash-O-Lanterns, so come on in, have a seat. By morning, I don't want a single jack-o'-lantern in the whole town unpulped. Kevin grinned like a shot fox, nodding his head and raising his hand for a high five. Jeffrey obliged him, holding his hand up to Chris next. Chris didn't say anything, though. His lips were slowly creeping into a distinctly evil grin as he thought over the implications, and he slapped his own palm against Jeffrey's. Chris was smart, probably smarter than anyone Jeffrey knew, but he loved a good trick as much as anyone. The idea of all the townspeople seeing their pumpkins smashed, their town's pride destroyed, made him feel like the Grinch at the end of the movie, sans the change of heart. We'll be legends. More than legends, we'll be infamous, Chris said, as he pulled his hands into a raised fist. Jeffrey laughed. Boys, I guarantee that the day after Halloween, we'll go down in town history for what we've done. As they sat on the commons and started to flesh out their plans, Jeffrey had no idea how right he was. They stood in Jeffrey's garage later that day and made plans. Halloween was 5 days away, and they had to make sure that they could commit their prank and get away with it. Being arrested for a stunt like this would only elevate their street cred, but Jeffrey was honestly a little worried about how the town would take it when they smashed all the pumpkins. As the three rode their bikes towards his house, they had passed through downtown and had seen the shops littered with pumpkins. The plaque that commemorated them as the plaque that commemorated when the world's largest pumpkin had come through with the fair one year showed resplendently on the front of the town hall. The display tables of pumpkins outside the Jack-o'-lantern museum made the tables sag under their orange mass. Jeffrey thought again about how vital the stupid things were to the town. They could get into a lot of trouble for this, so the first order of business would be masks. The pumpkin vendetta. That would have been a good one for the story, too. They need to be full face masks, too, Chris put in when Jeffrey brought it up. I don't want them seeing our hair or our noses and identifying us somehow. Kevin laughed. Easy. My bro and I are heading to Seavers tonight. You guys can slide me some cash for masks, and I'll bring back some quality stuff. Jeffrey looked at Chris as he looked back at him. This was a big ask from Kevin, a guy who still got lost on his way to school sometimes. Kevin's role in the gang was muscle, That was obvious, and trusting him with something like this was a stretch. If he got distracted when he and his bro got to Seaver, they could be out some money, and then they'd have no masks for the caper. Chris was right when he said that the full face masks would be a must, and the shops in town wouldn't have anything like that. Kevin must have noticed the look because he got a little flustered. Come on, guys, I can do this. Do you want good masks or not? Chris shrugged at Jeffrey, who sighed and took out his wallet as he handed Kevin a 20. Kevin looked at Chris, opening and closing his hand as he crumpled Jeffrey's $20 bill in his grip. Chris dropped his motorcycle boots off the table and rolled his eyes, pulling out a 20 of his own and adding it to the pile. Kevin reached into his wind pants and pulled out a 20 of his own, adding it to the pile too before pushing the whole wad into his pocket. They were taking a big chance on Kevin, and both made sure that he damn well knew it. Oh, well, thank you. It took me a long time to get comfortable with my voice. Let's see. The next few days were agony for Jeffrey. He couldn't tell anyone what they were planning to do. That would ruin the prank, but they still had to make sure that they had alibis. Providence threw them a bone on that one because their friend Mark was having a Halloween party that night. One RSVP later, and they made the party part of their plan. People would see them, they would remember that they'd been there, and Jeffrey and his friends could sneak out at 9:30 and be back before any of the booze-soaked brains at the party had missed them. It was a perfect plan, promised to give the boys maximum deniability if questioned. Excuse me. Even so, Jeffrey didn't sleep well that week. He was plagued with dreams that he would stagger awake from and fall back asleep into as soon as his eyes closed. Jeffrey saw himself smashing jack-o'-lantern after jack-o'-lantern in a deep fog, surrounding everything as he moved from gourd to gourd. All the while, something watched him from the haze. Jeffrey couldn't see it, but it was big. Its red eyes seemed pleased by what he was doing. Now and again, Jeffrey would raise his bat to salute the mysterious figure, and it would rear back and cackle like a demon. Those dreams terrified him, but Jeffrey always woke up feeling elated at the regard of this creature. Dang, Tyler, thank you. I do appreciate that. Well, dang, Leanne, I didn't know I had fans that far out. Hi, Bella. We're just getting into Smash-O-Lanterns. If you're just joining us, pull up a chair. We're going to read some spooky Halloween stories and, hold a little palaver in between, I suppose. Let's see. The three seemed to plan constantly that week. They'd use their bikes as transportation. Jeffrey figured they would cut around on their bikes and with less notice than a car, and they would be faster than moving on foot. Jeffrey figured they would have about an hour and a half to pull this little caper off before the devastation was noticed. Excuse me. And speed would be critical to this operation. Kevin had some baseball bats in the shed that they had planned to use, and the three began to map their route. As long as Kevin got the masks, they'd be home free. He winked at them Friday afternoon as his brother came to pick him up from school. Don't forget, Jeffrey reminded him. I got this, boys, Kevin scoffed, hopping into the Jeep as the two peeled out for Seaver. Chris and Jeffrey parted ways then, hoping against hope that they'd have the last piece of the puzzle soon. Oh man, thanks guys. We're reading Smash-O-Lanterns. So settle in. A little bit, feeling a little bit better. Still not real great, but it is what it is. Can't tell if it's allergies or still being sick though. Let's see. Chris sent him a text later that night saying, I still haven't heard from Kevin. Jeffrey sighed as he buried his face against the pillow. Kevin better not mess this up. Chris came over the following day and found Jeffrey in the garage. He was oiling the chain on his bike when Chris pulled up. He was preparing for tonight, and Chris looked put out. Jeffrey could guess the source of the anger. Chris had been radio silent since yesterday after school. Not a text, not a call, nothing. He forgot. He forgot, and you know it, Chris said. We don't know that, Jeffrey said, trying to remain positive. Though brilliant, Chris could be violent and prone to moodiness sometimes. Jeffrey didn't want him bailing at the last minute. He won't return my texts, and his phone goes straight to voicemail. If he and his brother spent the night in Seaver, we could be screwed. Jeffrey started to speak, but at that moment, a familiar Jeep pulled up in the driveway. Kevin leaned in to say something to his brother before taking a brown paper sack from the back seat as the Jeep drove off and Kevin approached the pair. He was all smiles, not reading the room at all, and when Chris walked towards him, he spread his arms out as he prepared to wrap him in one of his annoying bro hugs. When Chris socked him in the gut instead, Kevin's face faded as he groaned and fell to his knees. Jeffrey pulled him back, but Kevin took it in strides as Jeffrey tried to pull the greaser away from him. What was that for? Kevin gasped, not really hurt, but definitely startled. That was for bugging out and going radio silent for the last 24 hours. I dropped my phone in a puddle about 5 minutes after I got there. I didn't realize that you two were so worried about me. Chris balled up his fist, starting to go for Jeffrey again as Kevin tried to pull him. Straining against Jeffrey as he tried to hit Kevin again. Jeffrey pushed the greaser into a nearby recliner, kicking up a cloud of dust as he tried to settle himself. No worries, as long as you got the masks, Jeffrey said, still not holding out hope for the scatterbrained musclehead. Kevin grinned as he threatened to cut his head in half with a smile. Oh, I got the masks. I think you'll find that they're very fitting, too. We're reading Smash-O-Lanterns, guys, so settle in. Well, just don't hit the ones on my front porch. They took us forever to find any. And I've still got one more to carve before Halloween. Let's see. Jeffrey took the bag from Kevin, feeling the thick rubber mask inside the plain brown grocery sack. He reached in and pulled out a ghoulish orange mask that made him grin as wide as Kevin. The plastic thing looked like a demented jack-o'-lantern, its gaping black mouth cut into a frightening double row of teeth. Its black eyes were angled with malice, and Jeffrey could see a big plastic roach crawling from its nostril as he took it out. It was perfect. Jeffrey couldn't believe that Kevin had picked these out. It would be fitting to attack the town's established idol with the very likeness adorning their faces. He tossed a second mask to Chris, and the greaser goggled at the ghoulish thing as he grinned like a fool. Jeffrey could feel a lot of anxiety melt away, and when he raised his hand this time, it was to give Kevin a hearty high five. Kev, these are perfect. You act like I would bring you anything else, Kevin said, with a small amount of swagger. Jeffrey pulled the mask on, feeling the plastic sit on his face like a second skin. Tonight, we're going to make history, boys. If you're just joining us, we're reading Smash-O-Lanterns, so have a seat, come and listen. We're going to have lots of stories after this one, too, so settle in. As the sun began to set and the trick-or-treaters started gathering on the sidewalks, the three set off on their bikes. They had their bats and masks stored in their backpack, along with the required six-pack of beer to get into the party. They had dressed darkly in black pants and hoodies, and they were prepared to ride the streets like phantoms after dark. They arrived at Mark's party around 7, the festivities already in full swing, and it was a typical high school underage drinking party. Lots of people making out in the living room, a collective of smoke clouds around the back, around the front, people dancing around to loud music, and a kitchen that was 5 parts wet bar and 5 parts buffet. Mark's parents were out of town. They always seemed to be out of town, and Mark's house was typically the place where parties happened. The three stood around and sipped lukewarm beer, keeping an eye on their watches, their nerves tuned up to 1,000,000,000. They didn't want to be here too long, just long enough to get noticed. They would say hi to some people from school, play a few rounds of beer pong, and at 9:45 they would slip out and take their bikes off quietly. They'd been going over their individual roles for days. Chris would take 1st through 6th, Kevin would take 7th through 10th Street, and Jeffrey would take 11th through 15th. They were There were roughly 5 to 10 houses per street, and everyone would meet up at downtown when they were done. If someone got done early, they would start smashing pumpkins on downtown as they waited for the others. Hang on, lost my spot. If the cops came, they would run. The person discovered would lead them away so the others could keep smashing, and then meet back up after they lost the cops. They would They would not assume the vandals were organized. They would think they were holiday pranksters out for fun. And if they grabbed one of them, then the other two could finish the night's work before anyone was the wiser. When Jeffrey's watch jangled to let them know it was 9:45, the three of them snuck out the back and rode off into the night. They split off about 10 o'clock. The front porch is dark, save for the glow of the jacks, and in the streets were mostly free of trick-or-treaters. Jeffrey slipped on his mask as he came to 11th Street, grinning beneath it as he pulled his bat from his pack. The first Gordy had exploded in a shower of orange skin and wet innards. He smiled beneath the mask, smashing the other two as he moved to the next. The pumpkins were old by now, starting to rot, and the bat made quick work of them. Jeffrey had finished with the street in no time, his arm burning from the effort, but his desire for more burning hotter still. He'd seen people peeking from their windows, but no blue and whites came to chase him away. The work seemed to be too easy. The jack-o'-lanterns flew apart with a single swing of the bat, and Jeffrey reveled in the feel of his anger and fear being satiated. He would look back on that feeling throughout the years and feel deep shame, but tonight it was all about the revenge from his source of terror. Jeffrey was not challenged until 12th Street. Ugh, wet the pipes a little there. We're reading Smash-O-Lanterns, so come have a seat. Trying to think some of these posts, but it's not working. Let's see here. He had gotten cocky halfway through his culling. He wasn't content to just smash the jack-o'-lanterns anymore. Oh no. Jeffrey had started throwing them against trees, mailboxes, and the houses that they sat silent guardians over. No one came out to challenge him, their love of their pumpkins going only so far, and Jeffrey felt untouchable as he shattered his last gourd against the door of 3608 12th Street. When the man lumbered from behind the porch, laying hands on Jeffrey as the boy grabbed for another pumpkin, Jeffrey was terrified for half a second. The mask had become turned around during his effort, and he hadn't. Sorry. The mask had become turned during his effort, and he hadn't seen the man as he came sneaking up towards him. The light was poor, but Jeffrey was pretty sure it was Mr. Baskey, his English teacher. He was standing in his bathrobe and asking Jeffrey just what the hell he thought he was doing as he tried to wrestle the last of the pumpkins from him. Jeffrey had a short and squashy tug of war with Mr. Baskey, and finally had the bright idea to just let go of the hateful pumpkin. Jeffrey's fingers had started to slide through the thin skin of the pumpkin's base anyway, and the last thing he wanted was slime all over his hands. The old man stumbled backwards as Jeffrey released his hold and fell on his backside as the pumpkin splattered against him, covering him in the soupy guts and rotten seeds. He looked at Jeffrey for a moment, so lost and afraid of this pumpkin demon, who was visiting its wrath on his house. And for a moment, Jeffrey came to his senses. He started towards him, wanting to help him up, but then the shadow fell across him, and he looked up to find a true demon standing on the sidewalk. Oh, thanks, guys. We are still reading Smash-O-Lanterns, so have a seat. Excuse me. He was standing in the shadows of a giant inflatable pumpkin, and the streetlights seemed loath to touch him. He was massive, a huge shadowed figure of steel and green. When he sliced the inflatable with the axe or sword or whatever it was that he carried, It sputtered in death as it puddled on the lawn. Jeffrey was frozen by him for a moment, his terror and anger at the pumpkin paling in comparison to the madness at the sight of this creature. Then it spoke, the voice of winter, and he was once again filled with a potent flame. To hell with him! Your work must be fulfilled. Jeffrey nodded, mounting his bike and riding off without a second glance at the prone man he'd left behind. By the time Jeffrey finished his work, it was nearly midnight. How had it gotten so late? He had been so taken by the act of destruction that Jeffrey had lost track of the time. He was surprised that no one else had come out to challenge him and wondered how no one had called the police yet. Jeffrey's clothes were splattered with pumpkin, his mask caked with dried seeds and goopy rind, but he didn't feel tired in the least bit. Quite the contrary. Jeffrey felt an almost maniacal need to see more pumpkins smashed beneath his bat. He rode downtown, feeling the cold breeze drive him forward, the chill stoking the blaze of revenge. Excuse me. The fell breeze felt like oncoming winter, and it seemed to lend Jeffrey its power. As Jeffrey rode into downtown, he passed the remains of many smashed jack-o'-lanterns on the way. Chris and Kevin had been busy, it would seem. Tables had been overturned, and gaping holes from the pumpkins greeted him as he rode. They had thrown them into the street, smashed windows on storefronts, and scattered the guts of numerous gourds everywhere. If Jeffrey had been in his right mind, he would have doubtlessly seen that this was too much. They hadn't agreed on this level of vandalism, nothing even close, but at that moment, Jeffrey was emboldened by the sight of such destruction. This was his will, so Jeffrey thought, and he would be rewarded for his efforts. Jeffrey felt the mist gathering over the town as much as he saw it. Its icy fingers were making chill bumps pop up on his arm, and he found himself looking for the figure on the sidewalk. Jeffrey expected him to appear in the mist and cackle, congratulating Jeffrey for orchestrating such a fine bit of mischief. But if he was here, he was hidden for now. Jeffrey found Kevin and Chris on the commons. Thanks for your generosity, guys. I really appreciate it. If you're just joining us, we're reading Smash-O-Lanterns. So have a seat, get yourself something warm to drink, and listen for a while. Excuse me. It seemed that this was where the police had been. The cruiser's blue and white lights were cutting through the fog, but they couldn't hold a candle to the blaze that burned on the commons. Jeffrey gawked at it, speechless at the towering fire that the two had created. They had set the greenhouse on fire. They had set a pyre and called the police right to them. In his wonder and disbelief, though, Jeffrey forgot to keep an eye peeled for trouble. Someone pushed him suddenly, spilling him into the street. They fell on him as they wrenched his arm painfully behind his back, and the fall had knocked the wind out of him. He didn't have any strength to fight them off, and when they lifted Jeffrey to his feet, they shouted for him to stop resisting. Jeffrey was shoved towards the strobing vehicle, pushed into the back seat. He shimmied to the other side, wanting to see if his friends would escape, but what Jeffrey saw was far from what he had expected. Outside, Kevin and Chris were backed into the thick fog that swirled around the commons. The police were moving in, nightsticks in hand, and the cop that had cuffed Jeffrey was moving up behind them as he yelled into his radio. He didn't seem to be reaching the person he wanted, though, because Jeffrey saw him jerk his head away as it crackled and sparked on his shoulder. He cursed and pulled it off, stomping on the box as it caught fire, and looked away from his fellow officers as he tried to put it out. That's why he didn't notice the figure when he came riding out of the fog. Jeffrey saw him, though. He saw his red eyes first, glowing from high in the fog as he came out behind his friends. He was tall, nearly 10 feet, and Jeffrey saw the two officers freeze as they noticed him. He came between Chris and Kevin, a single hoof stepping from the fog as his horse parted the mist. His armored form came next. his armor forest green, his horned helm the color of moss, his sword shrieking like a wildcat as he drew it out. Kevin and Chris didn't even look at him. Their pumpkin heads were fixed on the officers. He was far more fantastic than Jeffrey could have imagined. Neither his dream nor the phantom on the sidewalk had done him justice, and when he charged, the officers broke like quail. Jeffrey heard him laugh, that biting cackle that had haunted his dreams. When he sliced down at the first officer, the man tried to impose his flimsy nightstick in the path of the Vorpal blade. It sheared through the nightstick, the man's ballistic vest, and finally into his flesh. He fell to the ground in pieces, and the other two officers looked at those twitching pieces a little too long. The figure laid into them with gusto, and Jeffrey jumped as a head bounced off the front of the glass, resting on the hood. The rider slew them all, rode them down like children, and when he rode towards the cruiser, Jeffrey knew that he had arrived. The Green Man had returned. He leaped the car and rode into town, Chris and Kevin following mutely behind him. Jeffrey pivoted in the seat, screaming for them to let him out. He kicked the door, kicked the glass until it splintered in a cascade of spidery cracks. Excuse me. But the rider and his grotesque minions were already disappearing into the fog. They left him there with the bodies. They left him there to take the blame. Jeffrey kicked until his legs ached. He screamed until his throat felt like it would break. He pulled on the cuffs until his wrists bled. In the end, it didn't matter in the slightest, though. More cops arrived as the mist dissipated. Jeffrey was taken to jail, his mask removed and his identity discovered. He was thrown in a jail cell, alone, while the cops tried to sort out the havoc that was going on around town. Calls were coming in from all over town, and the 17 more deaths were reported that night. Fires were blazing in several homes, broken sprinklers and fire hydrants that seemed to have been frozen in the balmy October air, and too much vandalism to keep track of. Mark's party had been turned into a bloodbath, and the kids that had escaped were saying it was a guy with a sword and two guys in pumpkin masks with bats. Through it all, Jeffrey just sat in a dejected state in the cell. They had left him. He'd been found unworthy, and now he would rot like one of those pumpkins that he'd shattered into so much paste. At some point, Jeffrey must have dozed off, because when he returned to himself, the sheriff was leaning against the bars of his cell, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. "Hi, Suzanne. Glad you could join us. We're reading Smash-O-Lanterns. But there will be more stories after this too, so if you enjoyed the stories, stick around." All right. "Good, you're awake." Jeffrey said nothing. "Funny how everything seems to go to hell the second I decide to leave town for an evening. My granddaughter wanted me to take her trick-or-treating, so I drove to the next town over to oblige her, and came back to find a whole mess of problems. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, son?" Jeffrey said nothing. "Funny how you decided to smash up only the pumpkins. You know why the citizens carved those pumpkins, don't you?" Jeffrey continued, saying nothing. "Sure you do. There's a mural in the museum. You've probably seen it 1,000 times, but never really thought much of it. The settlers that founded this place came fleeing something they had prayed they had left in the old country. That image on the mural of the tide riding down on us, that's not the English invaders as we sometimes pretend for the tourists. Granddad said his granddad told him the story of the Green Man, a spirit of winter who sought sacrifice and punished those who wouldn't give him his due." Jeffrey said nothing. "That's why we light the jack-o'-lanterns. That's why the tradition is still here today. We light them so we might forget that the demons once haunted us. We light them because they keep them away. You've left us naked in the breeze, boy. You've burned our greenhouses and smashed our talismans. Now, there's nothing to stop him from coming back tonight. The sheriff's eyes bore into him, but Jeffrey said nothing. Did you see him, boy? Did you see that devil? He wrung his hands over the bars like a drowning man treading water, but Jeffrey refused to answer him. After he'd wrung those bars for a few minutes, the sheriff left. Jeffrey never saw him again. Jeffrey never saw much of anyone ever again. When he heard the creak and groan of pavement and metal being separated, Jeffrey smiled. He knew they'd come back for him, and when the bars on the street parted from the cement, he looked up to see Kevin and Chris had returned for him. They were still wearing those masks, but Jeffrey had an idea that those masks weren't rubber anymore. Jeffrey had an idea that those masks were permanent now, and that this would be, and that his would be too once he slipped it on. Jeffrey crawled onto the street level, falling to his knees when he saw that he was with them. The voice in his head told him that he needed one more, when these two imps needed a leader. The rider tossed something rubber to the pavement at Jeffrey's feet, and with trembling hands, Jeffrey slid the grotesque pumpkin mask back on. The voice told him he had work to do. The green man called Jeffrey to action, and who was he to deny him? All right, that was Smash-O-Lanterns. Hope you guys liked it. Let's see. I think we read The Whistler last time, didn't we? Any suggestions? Anybody got anything they'd like to hear? Hope you guys are enjoying the live stream so far. Kind of reminds you of the series we're in right now, doesn't it? We've got a little pumpkin head running around right now that's stirring up some real trouble in Frasier. Well, thank you, Tyler. Tyler here writes some pretty good stories too. If you enjoyed dang it, Tyler, what was it called? The stories about all the flesh buildings that I had up a couple of weeks ago. Tyler wrote those, and they were really good. Oh, he's too modest. He's got some really good stories there. I'm gonna adjust my chair here. Give me just a second. Pay no attention to what's behind that curtain. Can't have you guys seeing how messy my bedroom is. One of these days I'll be able to afford an office, but not quite today. The Covenant series, that was it. It was a 4-parter. Tyler wrote those. They were really good. Like I thoroughly enjoyed reading them. Let's see. Ooh, there's a good one. This is an older one. I actually wrote this one the first Halloween that I was writing stories. It's it became a little bit special to me. Around this time, my son was being diagnosed for autism. I can't imagine where he could have gotten that from. But so yeah, this one kind of struck home a little bit in retrospect. It's called Twick or Tweet. I'm sure some of you have read it. It's about the little ghost boy. Now, let me turn that light down just a little bit. It's a little glary. Much better. Alrighty. And let's see here. Twick or Tweet. Mark heard the doorbell ring and reached for the candy bowl in the side table. Opening the door, he found a small boy dressed in a bedsheet with eye holes, cut out in the big, unmatched way that often precedes a homemade costume. The edges of his glasses poked through the circles at the edges of the sheet, as he held out his pillowcase and shook it at Mark. Mark chuckled a little and looked down at the small ghost that stood begging on his front porch. "Oh my, what a scary ghost. Did you come to haunt my house?" The ghost stood silently, seeming to forget what he was there for, until a large, obliging woman standing on the steps behind him prompted him. "What do we say, Derek?" Mark could see try that again. Mark couldn't see the boy's face brighten, but he knew that the little ghost must be smiling behind his sheet. "Twick or tweet!" he yelled suddenly. Mark laughed as he threw some candy into the boy's pillowcase. The boy laughed at it as he turned to leave, and his mother beamed at Mark. "You're a dear. It really means a lot to him." He waved a hand at her. "A couple of bucks a week to make a kid happy is nothing. Same time tomorrow?" She laughed like clockwork, rain or shine. As if to as if to deny his claims, she sneezed hugely and shook her head. "Getting sick?" Mark asked, but she waved it off as just allergies or something. She thanked him again, the little ghost already streaking off down the road as they made their way to the next house on the list. Mark smiled, watching them go before closing the door and heading inside. Derek had been coming to his house every day at 5 p.m. for the last 2 years. All the neighbors kept candy for him because, well, they knew how much it meant to him. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Derek. You could see him out riding his tricycle in front of his house, under his mother's watchful eye, of course, or running to meet his father in the yard as he came to wrap him in a big bear hug. Neighbors would ask him to help with their yard work or thank him when he refused the money that they'd offer him. They had been there for his family on the bad days, too, when his tantrums flared, but Derek's good days had certainly outweighed his bad ones. Derek was severely autistic, his mother had said, and the little trick or treating helped him get through it. And if a little trick or treating helped him get through the day, then most of them were happy to help. Mark returned to making dinner. Okay, no, I turned the lights down too low. Can't read it if I can't see it. Mark returned to making dinner, feeling good about the joy that he had brought to the little ghost. He finished his dinner preparations, put some laundry into the washer, tidied up the kitchen, and then settled the dishes that he used to cook for himself. As he washed up, Mark couldn't help but smile as he saw Derek walking back to his house. He had a half full pillowcase swinging from his fist and a skip in his step. It was hard to see his expression under the ghost costume, but Mark was sure that he was smiling and chattering animatedly to his mother. She rested a hand on his back and nodded as he laughed as they walked to the and nodded and laughed as they walked towards the house. She sneezed again as Mark watched, and he sneezed almost sympathetically himself. Another sneeze followed it closely, and he shook his head. He hoped he wasn't getting sick too, and went back to his chores without giving it a second thought. We're reading Twick or Tweet, guys, so if you're just joining us, settle in and have a story. It was probably just allergies or something, after all. The next day, however, found him sick as a dog. It was raining, the sky was a black mass of dark purple clouds, and Mark woke up with a throbbing headache and a head full of snot. It must be a summer cold, Mark thought, but as the day went on, he wondered if it wasn't a flu or something. He had soup for lunch, some NyQuil and over the counter cold medicine as a chaser, and plopped down on the couch as he tried to nurse himself back to health. The rain came down in sheets outside, and he let the pounding on the windows soothe him to sleep as the TV droned on and the meds did their work. Mark had been dozing in a deep pool of medicated bliss when he woke with a start as someone knocked on his door. Excuse me. He left the light off and thought it couldn't be evening yet. It was black as night in the living room. Someone was pounding on his door, but when Mark tried to get up, his legs wobbled like an old man. He glanced at the clock groggily, seeing the numbers swimming before his eyes. It told him that it was 5 p.m., and Mark realized that it must be Derek, here for his daily visit. Mark reflected that Derek's mother must be crazy to take him out in this weather, and as the person kept knocking, Mark finally called out from the couch. Give me just a second, guys. Oh, what's up, Matt? Good to see you. I gotta go let a cat out. Give me just a second. Come on, Bob. Come on. Oh. My wife has adopted some dumpster kittens, and they're cute and all, but they're half feral, so just kind of getting by there. Oh, always good to see you, Matt. It's been a hot minute. Let's see, where were we? Tonight's story brought to you by Arizona Green Tea. Send me some money, Arizona. Let's see. I'm not feeling well today, buddy. Let me take a rain check till tomorrow, okay? The knocking paused and then began again. Mark heard him say, "Twick or tweet," from the front porch, and he sounded confused. It was him, all right, but Mark's head was so spinny that he couldn't even get up from the couch. He tried to placate Derek a few more times, even tried to get up again to no avail, but finally he just gave up. Mark just laid back and tried to ignore him, but it didn't seem to stop him. After nearly 10 minutes of knocking, Mark was just about out of patience. Why was Derek's mother allowing this to continue? Surely she must be able to see that something was outside the norm. Mark was steadying himself to try to get off the couch again when the beating finally stopped. Mark heard footsteps slowly walking down the stairs to his porch and then to parts unknown. He dozed back off again, and the next thing he knew, it was later, and there was a light in his eyes. True. The lights were strange to his medicine soaked brain. They flashed red and blue and red and blue, and someone was yelling. He didn't think it was far from the house, but as he tried to get up again, he realized that his legs had fallen asleep. Had someone been here earlier? Mark wasn't quite sure. It seemed like something important had happened earlier, but he just couldn't focus on it. As the lights moved away, taking their blinking with them, Mark fell back asleep. When he woke up next, it was 4 a.m., and the rain had finally stopped. Mark wobbled up and managed to make it to the bathroom before he pissed his pants and staggered to the kitchen to take some more medicine. He had a drink of water before collapsing onto the couch again and falling into a muddled sort of half sleep as the TV talked about how a local man had taught his dog to search for coins. Mark was thinking about a weird dream that he'd had. He had seen flashing lights in the dream. Had he seen police cars or maybe an ambulance? Before he could overthink it, he fell asleep again and didn't wake up until the blaring of his alarm forced him to wobble to his bedroom and turn it off. Mark took it easy that day. He called out from work again and watched TV on the couch, rising only to eat and medicate himself. As 5 o'clock creeped closer and closer, Mark started to feel like his old self again. As he sat there, he remembered the day before and felt guilty about ignoring poor Derek. He was sick, but Derek wouldn't have understood why his routine was being interrupted. Mark decided to make it up to the poor kid after leaving him hanging and went to get ready to receive visitors. He put on some fresh pajamas, made sure that there was still candy in the bowl, and even uncovered some full-size candy bars he'd been saving in the cupboard. He put them on top of the bowl just for Derek and set the bowl by the door. Mark returned to his seat on the couch, watching the clock as 5 ticked closer and closer. He expected the knock any minute as 5 chimed on the hallway clock. But as 5 turned into 5:30, he started to get a little worried. Mark went to the door and looked up and down the block. There were some kids riding bikes and a couple of mothers talking over their fence as their kids played nearby, but there was no sign of Derek or his mother. Mark glanced at their house and was surprised to see that their car was gone. That was odd. Derek's mother always got her errands done before 5, so Derek could go trick or treating. Mark wondered if maybe they'd gone on a trip or something. He hoped Derek was okay. Maybe he'd gotten sick after running around in the rain yesterday. After a few minutes of glancing up the street, though, Mark went back inside and started his afternoon routine. He had barely started preparing the chicken when Mark heard a knock at the door. That made him feel better. Derek was just running a little late. As he walked to the door, he saw the top of a sheeted head and grabbed the bowl with a little chuckle. Was just saying how glad he was to see the kid and apologize for yesterday when he saw that the front porch was empty. Mark looked around, seeing if maybe Derek had hidden himself behind a chair or off to the side of the porch. But no one was there. He shook his head as he went back to the kitchen. Mark thought that maybe he'd been hearing things. Perhaps he had been expecting to hear a knock, so he had manifested one. He had just gotten the spice on the chicken when he heard a knock from the door again. Twick or tweet! A familiar voice trumpeted from the door, and Mark walked back to get the candy with a big grin on his face. Well, you got me. I wasn't expecting you to. Mark looked confused as the door opened, and he found no one on the mat. Mark searched the front porch again. He went into the yard and searched around the side of the house. He looked down the road and up the road and still found no one who could have knocked. Had it been any of the other kids, Mark might have suspected someone was playing a joke on him. Not Derek, though. Jokes weren't Derek's thing. He had cried last year at the 4th of July block party when Mark had pretended to get his nose. Only a big hug and a half a dozen apologies, plus the return of his nose, had made it all better. Mark scratched his head as he returned to his cooking, but the feeling of something odd kept sliding up his spine. The next knock came at 6 o'clock. Mark brought the candy bowl with him again, but the porch was still empty. By 7, Mark was starting to get annoyed. He reminded himself that Derek really didn't know any better if it was him. The neighborhood boys had probably just taught him a new game, that and they were likely hiding someplace and getting a kick out of Mark looking for something that he couldn't find. He picked up the phone and tried to call Derek's mother to see if she was aware that the neighbor kids were using him for laughs. Excuse me. After a dozen rings, though, Mark hung it up and returned to finishing his dinner preparations. Maybe he'd try again later. By 7:30, Mark had received 5 knocks, and still no one was on his porch. He finally left the candy bowl on the doormat, figuring it was probably what they wanted anyway, and went back to eat his dinner. He was starting to wish that he'd done that from the start. The combination of recovering from being sick and being bothered by the door knocks was making him grumpy, and he really wanted this to stop already. Mark's dinner remained uneaten by 8 o'clock, though. He'd made five trips to the front door to see who was knocking, and as the sun started to set, Mark felt that the knocking must stop. Derek was afraid of the dark. This was common knowledge. Derek didn't like to crawl under houses, despite how many balls he'd lost under there, and he had cried for nearly 20 minutes one afternoon after his dad had asked him to get the weed whacker out of the shed without thinking about it. If this was Derek, something Mark was no longer entirely sure of, it would stop once it got dark outside. When the knocking continued, and he continued to find no source for it, Mark felt a chill run up his spine despite the July heat. What began as a prank was beginning to scare him. Mark had never believed in the supernatural, but this was beginning to rattle him. As 8 crept towards 9, the knocks came every 10 minutes, then every 5 minutes, then every minute. If you're just joining us, we're reading Twick or Tweet. Settle in. It's going to be a good story. Mark stopped answering then, but that didn't seem to help either. He turned up the TV and tried to ignore the sound, but it was impossible. The cries of "Twick or Tweet" came every so often, but at this point he was certain that the kids were making fun of Derek. Kids could be cruel, but he couldn't think of anyone patient enough to take it this far. By 9:30, someone was slamming their fist on his door hard enough to rattle it in the frame, and Mark was beginning to have doubts on whether this was kids or not. His mind couldn't help but wander back to the haunted houses and malicious entities trying to gain entry, and Mark decided that it was time to do something before his imagination ran away with him. He took up a fire poker and stalked across to the door in an angry clatter of bare feet. Mark was done with this. If he needed to threaten some kids to make it stop, then so be it. He threw the door open mid knock, lifting the poker to strike, but there was no laughter of teenagers or snot-nosed brats to be found. Just a boy in a bed sheet with his pillowcase held out. The front porch light cast his shadow back across the porch, and the sight of him here at night gave Mark a shiver. His sheet was dirty, mud covered around his mud crusting around the legs and feet, and the left eye of his glasses was broken in a spider web of cracks. His pillowcase seemed to be leaking water as he stood there, and if he was scared of Mark or his upraised poker, he never showed it. His silence was almost as unsettling as his appearance. Gone was the fastidiously clean boy in the ghost costume that he had become accustomed to, and something about the ghost boy was a lot more unsettling. "A little late for trick or treating, wouldn't you say, Casper?" Mark said, letting his arm come down slowly as he set the poker by the door. Derek didn't respond. "You haven't been the one knocking on my door all afternoon, have you?" Mark asked, trying to keep his voice even, not wanting to shout at Derek. Derek was a good boy, and if this was some misunderstanding, Mark didn't want to make the kid feel like crap for no reason. Derek still didn't say anything. "Does your mother know you're out this late? She's probably pretty worried if she—" "Why wouldn't you open the door yesterday?" Derek asked, and for a moment Mark was taken aback. Derek rarely said more than 4 words at a time, often not even in an order that one could understand. Here he had delivered a whole sentence just for him, though Mark couldn't say that he was glad to hear it. Derek's voice, ordinarily high and childish, with a slight stutter, was harsh and croaking, as it came from the stained ghost costume. He sounded like a river toad more than a little boy, and Mark took a step back as he tried to find his voice. "What? Why didn't you open your door yesterday? I was alone in the rain and you ignored me. Why didn't you open your door yesterday? Why didn't you open your door yesterday? Why didn't you open your door yesterday?" His croak became a scream, and as Mark backpedaled, he slipped on the runner rug. His tailbone came into sudden contact with the hardwood floor, and as he looked back, he could see the ghost boy slowly making his way towards him. "Twick or tweet, twick or tweet, give me something good to eat. If you don't, I don't care. I will drag you down somewhere," the little boy chanted. Mark couldn't think of anything to do, and his foot seemed to move of its own volition. He scooted back on the runner rug, bringing his foot up and out as he pushed the door closed in one swift motion. It slammed shut, but Mark heard a sound like a run-over cat scream as Derek slammed into the door. He kept sing-songing his terrible melody and punctuating the end of each verse with a loud scream that threatened to deafen Mark. Mark almost wished that it would. Hope you guys are enjoying the story. This one's almost done. We're reading Twick or Tweet. So settle in. If you've got any requests for the next story, let me know. Deafness would be a real treat right now. Mark stumbled to the phone and called the police. He thought vaguely about calling Derek's parents, but this was beyond them now. Something was going on here, and he needed help. When the operator came on, Mark explained what was happening and even let her hear the noises in the background. She told him to calm down and that she would send a patrol car around momentarily. Mark thanked her as he cradled the phone in his lap, his eyes locked on the door like a scared rabbit as he sat huddled in the living room. The slamming and screaming continued at the front door. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes went by, and still the pounding and wailing came from the front door. The lights the lights inside began to flicker and pulse as the monstrous voice rose to a crescendo. Without warning, the bulb above his head popped and shattered glass all over him. Mark pulled his knees to his chest, put his face against them, and sobbed uncontrollably as the cacophony went on and on around him. He had begun to wonder if this would ever end, when suddenly and abruptly it stopped. The silence was deafening. When Mark lifted his face from his knees, he expected to see that filthy bedsheet inches from his face. To his surprise and joy, there was no one. He left the cat. He was left crouched behind his couch, his house suddenly as quiet as a tomb. Des- Despite himself, Mark laughed a little as he realized he didn't know what to do. He'd been tormented by some Twilight Zone kid whom he had inadvertently snubbed the day before. Now it was over. The whole situation was just ridiculous. Then someone knocked on the door, and his laugh curdled in his throat. Mark looked at the door, feeling a spasm of terror rush through him. They knocked again, and it wasn't the usual pounding rush that he'd become accustomed to. That's better. Mark staggered to his feet and hobbled to the front door like a palsied old man. He could imagine his trepidation was the same as Poe's character in The Raven. The knocking, knocking, knocking at his chamber door came a third time, and when someone spoke from the other side, he jumped backwards. Hello, this is the police. We're responding to a call about a prowler. Mark relaxed a little bit and opened the door to reveal a male officer standing where his ghostly knocker had stood a moment before. Thank God you're here, Mark half whispered, sweeping his eyes across the porch before settling back on the officer. The knocking has been going on all day. Someone's been knocking on the door ever since 5 o'clock this afternoon, and the knocking has become progressively more violent. It just stopped as you pulled up, so I guess you must have seen someone on the porch, right? The officer gave him a questionable look. I'm sorry. I didn't see anyone when I pulled up. You say this has been going on all day? He asked, taking out a notepad. Since 5 o'clock. Are you sure you didn't see anyone? The knocking stopped literally a minute ago. The person knocking would have been there when you pulled up. No, didn't see anyone, he said, making notes. You don't have any idea who it might be, do you? Neighborhood kids or something? Well, I don't know why he would be out this late, but when I opened the door to chase them off, I could have sworn that Derek Hughes from next door was there. He seemed pretty upset, and he was wearing his ghost costume. Ghost costume? The officer said, surprised. Yeah, he comes around every day at 5 o'clock to trick or treat, but the officer seemed angry as he closed his notebook with a snap. No, couldn't have been him, he said, looking physically angry, and he had half turned away from Derek as he made to leave. Wait, it had to be him, Derek said, reaching out to grab his arm. He was in the ghost costume. He's worn it for the last 2 years, and the voice underneath was identical. Couldn't be, the cop said, pulling away. I was there yesterday when his mother called. He was killed yesterday when they crossed the street. Mark's blood ran cold. What? No, he was here. I saw him. I helped the paramedics load him into the ambulance myself. His sheet was covered in blood, and his mother was crying so hard I thought we'd have to load her in next. I don't know what you're playing at, but it isn't funny. He turned to go, and that's when Mark saw him. The little ghost had been haunting the dark corners of his porch, but when he stepped out of the shadows between a banister, he started singing again. Twick or tweet, twick or tweet, give me something good to eat. The cop came back in a hurry when Mark started screaming. They couldn't see the boy, his bloody sheet clinging to his broken form and his high pitched voice undulating like a strangled animal. But they helped the paramedics load Mark into the ambulance after he couldn't stop screaming. Mark saw him still. He comes to the door of his observation cell every day at 5 o'clock. The orderlies at the mental hospital have come to loathe 5 o'clock. It marks the screaming of their patient, Mark Sinclair, and the beginning of that evening's headaches. All right. It was Twick or Tweet. Hope you guys enjoyed the story. Take a little breather for a minute. Oh, they're running ads. When did they do that? It was definitely one of my earlier ones. It probably needs some tweaking. I was still pretty new at this. Oh yeah, definitely creepy. Like I was watching a lot of Twilight Zone at that point, and those creepy Billy Muddy kids, like the ones with weird powers. I was definitely inspired. Oh. So I asked it at the start, but I'll ask it again. Anybody got any good Halloween plans? I've got to go to the jail, the scariest place of all, so I'll be working all night. But hopefully you guys have got some cool Halloween plans. I'm doing a haunted trail tomorrow with the family. My oldest son is in an Addams Family play that's been going on for the last 3 nights. I think tonight's the closing night, so that was a lot of fun. He definitely did a good job. Oh, I wish my town still had a Halloween party. Oh yeah, that's the best part of the story is when the ghost is finally revealed. Um, I'm already starting to work on some what do you call it? I guess Christmas horror stories because it'll be that season again before we know it. I mean, I get you guys your Halloween spooks. I got to get you your Christmas spooks too. Happy anniversary. That's awesome. Well, my wife and I are doing 12 years this year. We got married in December though, so December 11th. Oh, no, Tyler, probably no Yule lads this year. that was a that was a bear. Oh, well, thanks for joining us, Matt. We'll let you know ahead of time so you can join us for the next one. No, when I set out to do the Yule lads, I was like, oh, it's only like 14 stories. It'll be fine. No, it was a lot. You want to make them long enough to where they can be read, and you still want them to be entertaining, but it was a lot. I think that was the same year I did 30 stories in 30 days too, which was also a lot. I keep meaning to do that again. It's just a time thing. I don't know when I'd do it. These days, jail's been so crazy, it's hard for me to crack out a story a day. I've been doing pretty good lately, but it's definitely difficult sometimes to get them going. Plus, not to brag, but I've been approached by a podcast that wants me to do some original work for them. They pay pretty good too. I won't name drop because I don't know if they want me to or not. But they pay really well, and it's been nice. But it's definitely cut into my writing time. Oh, you do better than that, Tyler. You write pretty good too. Oh yeah, they've I mean some of you guys who have seen my stuff on Reddit, you guys know that I charge for my readings, but these guys went above and beyond. Like I gave them my rates, and they're like, yeah, no, we're gonna pay you way more than that. I'm like, cool, I like that. I like being able to pay my bills with this. I actually did it's a longer story for them for coming up. I think it was like 22K words. Like, it's a biggie. Like, I did a big old detective story for them, and it came out really good. Like, he read it and he's like, this is nowhere near the parameters I sent you, but this is good. I like this. Oh, thank you. Um I'll have a lot more long form stuff coming up too. So I know sometimes that helps with like sleep listening. Like, if you listen to my stuff to go to sleep, which um I don't know if I could. It'd definitely give me some crazy dreams. But however you ingest them, I'm flattered. As long as you guys keep listening. Good thing I bought more of those. Let's see. Maybe one or two more. We're creeping into an hour territory there. I got to get the kiddo to bed pretty soon, so maybe like one more, maybe like one or two more. I don't know. Anybody got any suggestions? Oh, the Dollar General ones have been a big hit. Like, if you follow me on Reddit, we're actually like up to, I think it's like part 16 on Reddit. Um, so there's a lot to go on the channel. Um, that one took off a lot better than I thought it would too. Like, um, just every time I write a story on Reddit now, most of the comments are like, that's nice. Where's the Dollar General story? It's like it's coming. All right, I'm working on it. Um, there's a there's a character in the most recent one that I've been informed by lots of people. They're like, if you kill this character, we'll hurt you. We will find you and we will hurt you. And I'm like, okay, shit. When one of your side characters has way better plot armor than your main character. Like, but it's been wild. Oh, there's a lot of Dollar General to come. Like, I didn't foresee it being as long a series as it is, but it's definitely picked up a lot. Like, it's become pretty huge. Let's see. Let's do a wholesome one. I've got a wholesome one. Um, some of you guys remember Halloween Visits. I recently had a I recently had the most wholesome story on No Sleep last week, which of course got removed. So that's always nice. If you guys liked the story of Stingy Jack, the No Sleep narrators decided that it was too wholesome to be allowed. So I guess that's good. I don't know. I have no clue. Yeah, right, Bella. Like, there's a lot of Dollar General content there that I could still go over. Yeah, right. Like, they're like, no, you can't put wholesome content up here. I'm like, that's not wholesome. He's telling stories to a monster. They're like, yeah, but it's wholesome. Like, I don't get it, but it is what it is, I guess. If you don't want my content, then just say you don't want my content. I mean, No Sleep and I have a love hate relationship anyway. Like, if any of you are on Reddit in the No Sleep forum, like, not a lot, like maybe 15% of my stuff gets taken down for dumb reasons. Like, usually it's plausibility. They're like, well, it was written by an inmate in prison, so there's no way people could get it. It's like, yes, there is. I worked in a prison. There's lots of ways they could get it. There are so many ways that you could get things out of a prison. It's not even funny. Like, you guys really don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, I'll take a picture of my credentials and my license if you want me to prove that I work there. But you could literally hand something to your attorney at an attorney visit, and he can take it to your family. Like, I don't know, some of their stuff's a little wonky. Like, if any of you guys are like longtime listeners of the stuff, you guys remember Final Thoughts. Final Thoughts was, the guy talking to his wife on the phone as she dies, basically. That that was decided to be too wholesome for No Sleep. And I'm like, that is terrifying. None of your mods must be over the age of like 22. Like, that is a horrifying prospect, to be like spending the last few minutes of someone you love's life will tick by. Like, I I don't get it. Like, nah, didn't understand it. But I go round and round with their mods sometimes. I'm like, you're pigeonholing what horror has to be. And I don't like that. Like, I want to be free to write what I want to write. I don't want to write creature features every week. And that's all No Sleep really wants, is creature features or murder stories, or like just niche stuff. Like, I don't want to write about Wendigos. They're played out. I will write the occasional story about a Wendigo or a Skinwalker or like a Bigfoot or something, but they're played out. Like, I don't just want to write about that. It's I don't know. I'm weird like that. I like to write about new stuff. Ever had any luck? Yeah, I feel you, man. I feel you. Like, um, Tyler, I've got you on Reddit. I'll message you with some stuff. Like, there's a ton of other subreddits that you can post stuff in. And most of them just don't have the eyes that No Sleep has got. Yeah, see, I love urban legends and stuff, especially from like other countries. Like, um this year's Halloween stories, like we had Stingy Jack, and we had Rawhead and Bloody Bones. We had the Tooth Man, which is something I made up. But we've also had like Soap Sally. Soap Sally is a southern urban legend that not a lot of people knew about until I started writing about it, because I love the concept of some old hag out in the woods that just like makes soap out of children. Like, that's horrific. Like, I love it. I'm like, I need this. Trying to remember some others. There's a lot of like the Wampus Cat. I had a grandpa story about the Wampus Cat, and the Wampus Cat was a creature that like my mother used to terrify me with when I was a kid. Because like I love my mother. Like, my mother's my best friend, but like she didn't hit us a lot as kids. Like, she wasn't into like corporal punishment, but she was into psychological punishment. So she would like, you better finish your vegetables, or the skinless man that lives under the trailer will get you. And we're like kids, so we're like, okay, yeah, we don't want that. Soap from kids, yeah. Um, nah, like the southern legends and things. There's a ton of them, and a lot of them are terrifying, and they're great. A lot of them are present in the grandpa stories, like the fairy lights, the bottle tree stuff. My grandma told me about the moon children, like Glimmer and her people. They were almost like elves, but they're just like weird, like urban tree people. Like, my that was a story my grandma told me. Um, there's lots of stuff. I like to write about new stuff. I know we've got our established stuff, but new stuff is cool too. Oh, see, you got to finish them. They're. I'm getting ready to end season 2. Pretty soon. I'm gonna do a big long story. I've already talked to Ladama to see if she'll voice Glimmer for it. But it's going to be a biggie. It's going to be like The Bone Collector. It's going to be like a 5-parter. Um, Probably beginning of next year. Like I'm probably not going to have a chance to do it before then. But there will definitely probably be a Grandpa Christmas tale. I usually try to do at least one. Um, oh, you're welcome. Like I've said it before on here. Stories are like therapy to me. Like I don't have time to go to therapy, and stories keep my anxiety at a reasonable level. So I write. I write a lot. I write all the time. I write all the time. It's ridiculous. Um, like I was telling somebody about my output the other day, and they're like, "That's mental. Why do you do that?" It beats being bored at work because it won't let you do anything else. Like you can't hop on YouTube at work. I get away with answering comments, but you can't do much of anything. So I write, and I like it. It's something that's always brought me a lot of joy. I'm 37 years old. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. That's like just a ridiculous amount of time. Like mom's like, you've been writing longer than that because you used to tell us stories like when you were like little. She's like, just you'd make up stories and tell people. She's like, you've been writing forever. And I used to make jokes when I was a stand-up comedian that like my parents are so supportive that I'll never make it as a comedian because there's not enough dysfunction in my family. But they've been very supportive of my writing. Like they read just about everything that I write. It's wild. Well, thanks for stopping by, Johnny. We're probably gonna I'm probably gonna wrap it up here pretty soonish. Like I said, I gotta get my youngest to bed here pretty quick. Um, my oldest is finishing up his play probably about right now, and I think he and my wife and some of her sisters are going to see a Halloween movie. My youngest is too young for that, so somebody has to sit home with the kiddo. And I was like, "That's cool. I'll finish up some writing and do a live stream." So yay, good for you guys. It works out well. Um, let's see, maybe one more, and then we'll call it a night. How about that? Let's see. Let's do Halloween visits. Let me do some adjusting. My chair's gotten uncomfortable. All proceeds from tonight's live stream go to a new chair fund. There should be a new book coming out at the end of October or the beginning of November. I've got the cover art for it. I'm working on editing it. I've got a guy for that now. I only got him last week, so he's working overtime on it. He's doing a good job, but yeah, it should be one beginning of November. It'll be like this one. It'll be mostly Halloween stories. It'll have all the stuff I've wrote this year and a couple of other stories, and then all the Frasier stuff. The Frasier stuff will be in there, which I still have to finish writing tonight. Oops. Yeah, I got to finish writing and recording that for next week. I've been I don't know, like I can't end it on something that feels adequate. Like it's probably actually going to be an 8-parter instead of a 7-parter. Like I'm seeing now, I knew how I wanted to end it, and the more I write of it, the more I don't like the ending. So I'm gonna end it some other way. Um, but yeah, gonna should be a good size. Probably about 25 stories in it once it's done. Um, just a nice little one like this one. Nothing too big. And then there'll be a compilation coming out at the beginning of next year. Usually I do my compilations in July, but I think I'm going to start doing them at the beginning of the year. Probably they'll come out in like January or like February or something. So yeah, I'll give you guys something to look forward to. Nice Christmas presents for those of you guys that are on my $10 sub thing on Patreon, because they always get books when I write one. I think Tyler's one of those guys. Some of you guys might be on there too. I'm looking at names. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, should be good. Of course. Come back anytime. I'm gonna start trying to do a few more of these because they're, it's nice to have group interaction. Usually I'm either at work or I'm making videos. So yeah, I don't get to do a lot of these. I need to do more. Did anybody see that Mr. Creepypasta did one a couple of weeks ago? Like, I haven't seen him do one in like forever. Like, it had been a hot minute. Like, I was shocked. But nah, he did live readings of like some of his script stuff. So I was like, that's cool. Like live recordings where he goes back later and fixes it. That was pretty cool. I liked that. I had thought about doing it, but I didn't want to I don't want to copy him, I'll just read my books and stay in my lane, Let's see. Okay, speaking of Halloween visits. Come on, Dad, let's go. Lily stomped a slipper-clad foot on the sidewalk as she looked back at her father. She was ready to go trick-or-treating, and it seemed that nothing but Josh could keep her from her sweet treats. He was sitting on the front steps of his childhood home, a well-loved cul-de-sac teeming with costumed children. The moon hung overhead, a ghostly sickle that presided over his Halloween night. The children laughing and screaming as they stalked by. The street, a sea of superheroes, video game characters, colorful animals, and everything in between. He let his eyes drift past the excited pageantry, though. He was looking for one shape in particular. Josh's mom smiled, slipping her hand into Lily's and giving it a little tug. Come on, hun. Your dad's waiting for someone. We'll go trick-or-treating while he waits. Lily looked interested. Who are you waiting for, Daddy? Of course, she wouldn't remember from last year. She'd been excited about trick-or-treating, showing off her Wonder Woman costume and swinging between her father and her mother's hands as they walked. However, Laura was 6 months pregnant this year and had opted out of the hour drive to get to his mother's house. She had smiled at Josh knowingly as he left and told him to say hi for her. Lily's grandmother smoothed her hair as it sat under the tall princess hat. It's an old friend, dear. Your father meets him every year. Well, you're going to miss out on the candy, Lily said, her tone stating firmly that she wouldn't be sharing with him if he didn't come with them. Josh just smiled. That's okay, Lils. You have fun with Grandma, okay? Lily shrugged, her grandmother's tugging hand finally leading her towards the waiting cacophony of spooky delights. She glanced back as they walked onto the street, but was soon lost in the crowd and probably wouldn't remember anything about the conversation until next year. Josh leaned back, getting comfy as he waited for him to arrive. He did this every year, every Halloween after that first so many years ago. In many ways, the visits were what Josh looked forward to the most about Halloween. The candy was nice, the costumes were great, but seeing his friend was why he always came home on Halloween. No matter where Josh was, no matter what he was doing, he always came home for Halloween. This was the night that he got to see him. This was the night that Josh got to see Snarf. Snarf had been a mutt. He was a bull terrier mixed with a basset hound mixed with God knew what else. They had grown up together. Snarf was just a puppy when Josh first got him, and he was his best friend for many years. When Josh thought back on that time in his life, he was glad that he had gotten Snarf when he did. Kindergarten had been a difficult time for him, and his sheltered upbringing hadn't really prepared him for suddenly being around so many children. He was awkward and not what you would call popular. He had thick glasses, was overweight, and had isolated himself with his painful shyness. The other kids who had gone to daycare and Cub Scouts and T-ball together, took one look at Josh and dismissed him as a social outcast. It was tough being unwanted at the age of 5. His mother thought a dog might help build Josh's confidence, or at least ease some of his loneliness. In many ways, he believed his mother had recognized that the funk he was in was partially her fault, and was trying to make amends. She worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and often Josh was left in the care of his grandmother. She loved him and always doted on him, but she wasn't always up for the games a 5-year-old would be interested in. Thinking, thinking, yeah, sorry. Thinking about it over the years, Josh often thought that Snarf was a way for his mother to alleviate some of her guilt about leaving Josh alone. Whatever the reason, he had loved her for it. We're reading Halloween Visitor if you're just joining us, so take a seat. This is going to be a good one. His mother found Snarf at the Humane Society. He was a little smiling ball of fluff, and when he put his feet against the glass, she knew that he would be perfect. He'd been waiting for Josh when she had pulled up that day, and the boy's surprise had turned to joy as the wet puppy tongue slid over his face. He sat in the back seat the whole way home, the pup's head against his stomach, panting happily as Josh scratched him behind the ears. He was a rare animal whose temperament never led him to jump up on people or bark for no reason. His accidents were few and far between, and he was easy to house train. They called him Snarf because he had a deviation in his nose that caused him to make a snarfing sound whenever he barked. He was the best dog, the only one Josh had ever owned, and the boy had flourished with the help of his new companion. Snarf had gotten him out of the house, helped him shed some of his baby fat that made him the subject of so much ridicule. He had also been a great icebreaker to help Josh introduce himself to some of the neighborhood kids. By the time he had entered first grade, he had a couple of pals, but none of them could hold a candle to his friendship with his little wagging mass of fur. He was eternally grateful for the time he had gotten with Snarf, but would it but it yeah, but it would never have been enough. Josh dumped a fistful of candy into each of their buckets as the trio of Disney princesses said thank you, and as they went on to the next house in a flurry of skirts and sneakers. A pirate wandered up and gave him his best arg. Josh rewarded him with a couple of little Snickers bars, and he thanked him before wobbling on his fake peg leg. Josh kept scanning the crowd, unsure what was taking his buddy so long. He was usually here by now, but it was getting so late. He sat up a little as he saw a small ghost, 4 legs poking from beneath a short bedsheet. But when it turned and wagged its tail at a larger ghost who was walking it, Josh got comfortable again. He sat scanning around, hoping he wouldn't be too much longer. He'd sit here all night if he had to, though. Josh would sit here until midnight if it brought him 5 minutes with his buddy. Ooh. Josh had Snarf for 5 years, and those years were filled with mostly good times between the boy and his dog. Snarf was never a chewer or a digger, and Josh couldn't remember ever having to fill in a hole or run after him as he chased a car. Snarf also knew where the boundaries of his home were, and Josh never saw him run out of the yard to get on the road or after a car. He was a good boy, and the neighbors loved him. He would have liked him. He would have likely had a long life if it hadn't been for Josh. To this day, he blamed himself for what had happened to Snarf. It all started when Reggie moved into the neighborhood. Reggie moved in when Josh was 10, and his family took up residence in the Cranston house. Mr. Cranston had died about a month before, and though his family hadn't been neighbors with him, Mr. Cranston was a nice old man that was known by the whole neighborhood. He had always had the best yard display for Christmas or Halloween, and he'd given out the best candy to trick-or-treaters. When the ambulance came to take him away one night, everyone hoped for the best, but poor old Mr. Cranston had died of a heart attack. Luckily, he had been on the phone with his daughter when it had happened, or who knew how long it would have been before they found him. So when a moving van had come up the street bound for Mr. Cranston's old house, Josh and his friends had hopped on their bikes and went to check it out. Josh had a group of friends that he hung out with then. Terry, Walt, and Patrick lived in the same neighborhood as he did, and they had been friends for a few years. When the When the new boy was seen unpacking boxes from the van, they introduced themselves and welcomed him to the neighborhood. He was a big kid, tall and muscular, and Josh had gotten a weird feeling about him almost at once. "I'm Josh," he said, extending a hand. "We were just about to play some ball, if you're interested." "Reggie," the boy said, squeezing him hard as if he meant to hurt. "Yeah, sounds like that might be fun." One short conversation was enough to let the boys know that Reggie's interests were different from theirs. Later, they would all agree that he probably wasn't going to be a good fit for their group, and not just because of his attitude. He had scoffed at their comic books, asking if they were babies when they'd asked about his action figures, and when he'd said that baseball sounded fun, it had made everyone shiver a little. He was a large, sneering boy, and they all decided to keep their distance from him as they said goodbye and pedaled away. We're reading Halloween Visitors if you're just joining us, so pull up a seat, stay a while. But Reggie lived on the block, so he inevitably found a place in their games. He was never invited, always just sort of invited himself. He made the teams uneven, and no one seemed to want him to play, but the boys were too polite to tell him to buzz off. That was how it started, but Josh and his friends had regretted giving in so easily. They had been correct in their assumptions that he liked to hurt people. He had nearly broken Patrick's wrist when he fouled him during basketball, and he had shoved Terry off his bike during a bike race, skinning both his hands and his knees. Every time he threw a football to you, you either caught it or you ended up with a bloody nose. By the end of the summer, their politeness had turned into fear, and they were all too afraid of him to tell him to go away when he came to invite himself to their games. They were playing baseball when it happened. Reggie had seen them setting up and inserted himself into the game as he usually did. Terry sighed loudly, covering it up with a cough when Reggie got close enough to hear him. Josh and Terry had tried to explain that letting him play would make the teams uneven, but Reggie didn't really care. He made it pretty clear that he was going to play whether they liked it or not, and there really wasn't anything that could be done about it. Snarf had walked up then, snuffling Josh's hand for a pet, and Josh had dropped to his knees to give him a scratch. The dog accepted the attention, but his eyes never left Reggie, and Josh could see the mistrust in them. Reggie was the only person Josh had ever seen elicit a growl from the usually good-natured dog. Reggie had quickly learned not to come into Josh's yard, as Snarf would not tolerate it. This was fine with Josh because, unlike the others, whose houses Reggie frequently visited, Snarf kept him out of his yard and his fingers off of Josh's stuff. Josh was careful to keep Snarf inside, though, when he wasn't outside. He'd seen the way Reggie's little pig eyes narrowed as he looked at the dog, and Josh knew enough to be cautious. Hope you guys are enjoying the story. We're reading Halloween Visitors. Josh wished that he'd put Snarf inside when he started growling that day, but he had pushed it away and hoped that it would help let Reggie know that he wouldn't tolerate any funny business. The game had gone about as well as expected until the fifth inning. Reggie and Terry had been team captains, and Reggie had won the coin toss, so he picked first. Reggie and Walt had been on a team, and Terry and Josh had been on another, with Patrick acting as an umpire or standing in when someone got tired. Reggie had belted a few down the road, and he and Walt were winning 7-3. The trade-off for Reggie's freakish strength was that he wasn't particularly coordinated. He missed a few fly balls and let a few slide between his legs, so Josh and Terry weren't far behind weren't as far behind as they could have been. Hang on a second. Throat's getting dry. Story 2 brought to you by Arizona. Send me money, Arizona. All right. There'd been some good-natured shoving, as good-natured as it ever was with Reggie, but there'd been no real violence. Snarf had gone to lounge on the grass of his lawn, and the boys were having fun, despite 4 of them having to keep a careful eye on the 5th. It all went south when Reggie was up to bat. He cracked it a good one, and Josh and Terry prepared to go out of their way as Reggie ran. Reggie did not believe in dropping the bat after hitting the ball, as the bruises on the boy's ankles could attest. The bat made a loud crack as it hit the ball, and as it sailed down the street, Josh made a dash for it. Reggie came running around first base, Terry hovering between second and third as Patrick stood on the manhole that was serving as the pitcher's mound. Patrick had quickly figured out that a third might be required when the team took the field and had agreed to be the pitcher and the umpire. Walt was whistling as Reggie came around second, and the ball bounced once before Josh grabbed it. He turned to throw it when he heard Terry yell out in pain. Terry, Walt would later tell Josh, had tripped Reggie as he ran past, and the big boy had fallen and skinned his hands and knees. Reggie had come up mad, cracking him in the stomach with the bat and towering over the now fallen boy as he prepared to cave his skull in. Josh dropped the ball, sprinting towards the pair, as Reggie lifted the bat to hit Terry again. Walt ran from the sidelines as Patrick came shouting and telling Reggie to knock it off. All 3 knew they wouldn't make it in time before he hit Terry, and they silently hoped that he'd be alive before they stopped the second. Excuse me. Fast as they were, though, Snarf was faster. Snarf hit Reggie in the back, sending him reeling forward and dropping him into the street a second time. He stood over Terry protectively, snarling and showing his teeth at Reggie's back. Reggie was getting back up, shaking his head, but Snarf didn't seem to want to attack him. He just stood over Terry, the boy still frozen in surprise and fear. Reggie got back to his feet, his knuckles turning white against the bat's handle as he squeezed. Josh saw him turn in slow motion, the boy still running for Terry, but it made no difference. Snarf was staring daggers at Reggie, but when Josh called his name, he looked towards him, tail wagging. The bat crashed down on the dog, and the pitiful noise he made sent a shard of glass through Josh's guts. Walt and Patrick arrived in time to grab Terry under the arms and drag him away from the scene. Josh hit Reggie as hard as he could around the waist, dropping him to the concrete a third time and sending the bat clicking across the pavement in an angry wooden clitter. Reggie hit his head on the concrete, and as the wind oofed out of him, Josh punched him in the face. He saw Reggie's eyes glaze over a little from the impact, his lips quivering in surprise as his head bounced off the pavement. Josh got off of him, picking up the bat as Reggie tried to get his bearings. Josh pointed the bat at Reggie, yelling at him to get out of here. He told him not to come near him, his friend, or his dog again. He said some of the adult words he knew, the cusses sounding high and whispery as he fought back tears. Reggie got up on his elbows, grinning at Josh as he seemed to dare him to do anything. When the other 3 boys came up behind Josh, though, Reggie realized that he might have some trouble if he decided to act in haste. He could take 1 kid, bat or no bat, but 4 kids would probably beat the tar out of him. As such, he backed up on his hands before breaking into a run as he fled for his house. Josh would never feel bad about what he did to Reggie, but looking back at that moment would give him a lot of shame. The shame came from letting his anger blind him to Snarf's pain, from letting his need to dispel Reggie separate him from his dog when he needed him most. It didn't matter, though. None of it really mattered. When Josh turned back around, it was already too late. Reading Halloween Visitors, if you're just joining us, so have a listen. We're about halfway through. Josh found himself glaring at Reggie's old house as he watched a pair of Transformers walk off with their chocolate. The house was occupied now, but it had been empty for quite some time after his family had moved away. That had happened later, months after he killed Snarf, and those months felt like an eternity at the time. Reggie's parents had refused to believe that their son had killed the dog, and seemed angrier that Josh and his friends had beaten up their son. When they threatened to call the police after Reggie had come home with scrapes and bruises, Josh's mom had dropped the whole thing. Reggie's parents are threatening to sue us for hospital bills, and I can't afford something like that, sweetie. I'm sorry about Snarf, but if we call the police, we'll be in trouble too. She told Josh this, and he had seethed in his 10-year-old heart. He saw a big blonde kid with a crew cut walk up, dressed in a karate gi, and he almost didn't hand him anything. Reggie was still on his mind, and the kid could have passed for Reggie once upon a time. His eyes, however, didn't have that evil gleam in them, and Josh smiled at him as he handed him some candy. The kid threw him a mock salute and rejoined the throng, still parading up and down the street. Reggie had been bigger and meaner, but in the end, Reggie had been braver. Had not been braver. Josh had been inconsolable after the death of Snarf. He had pretended to be sick for a week, and his mother had let him pretend in the wake of that sorrow. His grandma stayed with him, often just sitting with him while he wallowed in his misery. She never pushed him as he moped around the house, just letting him feel his hurt as he waited for it to pass. The boy mostly just sat on the couch and watched TV, not really paying attention, just liking the noise. As they sat there one afternoon, her arms draped around him, she told Josh something he would never forget. I know you miss your friend, but you can't let his death be the end of your life. You have to live for both of you now. It's what he would have wanted. Josh looked up at her with big, swimmy eyes. But I miss him, she smiled. I know you do. It's almost Halloween, though, a time when they say the ghosts of our loved ones can talk with us and walk the earth again. Maybe, just maybe, his love will be great enough to bring him back to you. That made him think, if ghosts and spirits could walk the earth on Halloween, then maybe Snarf could too. Josh spent the rest of the month in a little better mood, waiting for Halloween night so that he could see if Snarf would come back to visit. His mom had to work on Halloween, but Grandma was home with him and said that she would take him out to trick or treat if he wanted to. Josh didn't want to go out, though. He sat in his room and watched out the window, hoping to see Snarf as he ran back up the walk. Sorry, just looking ahead a little. We're reading Halloween Visitors, so come have a seat. When his friends came to see him, they were all costumed and looking for him to join their group. They begged him to trick or treat with them. They hadn't seen him in months, and he had come. They hadn't seen him in months. He hadn't come out to play since the baseball game, and they missed him. Each of them was dressed as a different Power Ranger, and Terry said his grandma had sent a second costume if Josh wanted it. Josh had a feeling that Terry had bought it in case he decided to come out with them, and though touched, Josh didn't want to go. He might miss Snarf, and he wanted to be here when he came back. Once again, Grandma came to the rescue. I'll keep an eye out for him, and I'll tell him to stay if he comes here while you're gone. Josh was hesitant, but after some coaxing, he put on the costume and left with his friends. They had made him the Blue Ranger, his favorite Power Ranger, and as they set out into the night, he felt a little better. Josh had missed his friends over the past few weeks, but after what had happened, he couldn't bring himself to see them. Going out with them now made him feel a lot better, and they spent a few blissful hours filling their sacks with candy. It would have been the perfect Halloween if Reggie hadn't come. Josh Josh started to notice lights going out on the cul-de-sac as it ticked closer to 10. The kids who were present were becoming older, the little kids already turning in, and he furrowed his brow as Snarf still hadn't appeared. He felt like he had on that first Halloween after his death, looking for him as he walked up the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Josh heard a bark and snapped his head to the side expectantly. He frowned, though, when he saw it was just a lab in a bee costume. The owner came hurrying after him, followed by a football player heading for the next house. A pair of ninjas wandered up next, and Josh sighed as he dug them out some candy. Surely he wouldn't stand him up. He hadn't stood him up that night, and he wouldn't start now. It was almost 10 by the time the lights started going out on that long ago Halloween, too. The street became empty, and Josh's bag was beginning to get heavy. He and his friends had bulging sacks of candy, and they were sitting on the sidewalk and trading treats. Josh had started out looking for Snarf, glancing around as he walked against the tide of excited children. In those 2 hours, he had been granted a reprieve from his sadness, but as the night wound down, the old feelings were starting to fester again. He told his friends that he had to get home, and Josh started looking for him again as he moved through the thinning group of trick-or-treaters. He wanted to get home so he could see if Snarf had come back, which was probably why he missed Reggie. Excuse me. When the egg hit him in the side of the head, Josh staggered under the impact. His ear rang and he thought he was bleeding when his gloved hand came away wet, but one look told him it was just egg yolk. He looked back across the street and saw Reggie grinning at him from under a street lamp. He wasn't in costume, dressed in baseball shorts and a tank top, but he did have a silver bat in his hand, tossing an egg and catching it in the other as he smiled. Josh froze when he saw that he was staring at him, realizing how vulnerable he was out here alone with his house still 3 streets away. Been waiting for you to come out again. We got unfinished business, Four Eyes. I think I owe you the same sort of beating I gave your stupid dog, he chuckled, swinging the bat experimentally. Josh stepped off the curb toward him, angry at what he had said, but thought better of it immediately. The metal bat would cave his skull in, and Reggie was pretty good at swinging bats. He glanced towards his house. 3 street lights didn't seem so far, and Josh thought that he could probably run faster than Reggie if it came to it. It was either run or sit here and get killed by this psycho. The choice was pretty obvious. He made the first light easily, outstriping Reggie by a mile, but Josh heard him getting closer as he moved under the second street lamp. Reggie slapped the light pole with a bat as he went by, and it made a hollow tunk sound as it connected. Josh started to panic when he heard it. What if Reggie caught him? Would he kill him? Would he die here in the street like Snarf had? Josh wished Snarf was here as the tears streamed down his face. He would have protected him. He would have stopped Reggie from hurting him. If Josh hadn't distracted him on that day, maybe Snarf would be here to help him. His house was in sight when the second egg cracked into the back of his head. Losing my voice. Ugh. He stumbled as the egg connected. Josh had forgotten about the eggs, though it hadn't been thrown hard, it surprised him. He staggered into the fence that separated his yard from the neighbor's and crashed against it with a loud thunk. His head connected with the boards as he fell, and it swam a little as the cheap plastic mask broke into pieces. Josh was reaching out in slow motion, moving his hands and legs like someone wading through mud. He rolled onto his butt as he prepared to take off again, but it was too late. Reggie loomed over him, the street lights gleaming off the bat in his hand. "Looks like I caught you, Four Eyes," Reggie said, raising his bat. "Say hi to your dog for me when you see him." Josh pushed against the fence, hoping it would fall backwards, knowing it wasn't going anywhere. Reggie raised the bat high, metal twinkling as the light made galaxies of starbursts. Josh closed his eyes, preparing for the blow that would end his life prematurely. When the growl split the night through the he opened his eyes and looked between Reggie's splayed legs. Reggie had turned his head to look at the shadowy crevice between the house and the fence that now stopped Josh from escaping. Between the structure stood a snarling, red-eyed creature that seemed to fill the space with its shadowy mass. Reggie took a sidelong step away from Josh, and the beast snarled hugely as it took a single thunderous step towards the psychopath. Josh felt his breath hitch as Reggie stepped into the street, and the looming thing lowered its head and rumbled. Josh's brain couldn't fathom it. The nightmare creature had appeared in his neighborhood out of nowhere and was now seconds away from ending both him and his bully. When it loosed that single ear-splitting snarl, Josh put his head between his knees and pushed his palms against his ears. He sat in darkness, screaming against his legs as he prepared to be devoured. Josh had assumed he would die that night after running from the hulking brute, but never like this. When the warm tongue slid over his hair, he cracked the back of his head against the fence, trying to escape it. Then he opened his eyes, gasping like a trapped animal to find Snarf's panting, grinning face. Reggie was gone, the bat lying in the street, and Josh wrapped his arms around his lost friend. He laughed as Snarf licked his cheeks. He pressed his face against the dog's familiar short fur, and Josh's sadness melted away as Snarf's doggy tongue bombarded him. That's how his mom had found him, laughing with his back against the fence as her headlights dissipated the ghostly dog. Snarf had come back and visited him on Halloween night every year since. His mother didn't come right out and say it at first. She was upset about his injuries, but she told Josh later that she had seen Snarf for a few seconds before her headlights hit him. After he told her what had happened with Reggie, she called the police. She gave them the bat, told them Reggie had been a problem, and started a process to have a restraining order placed on him. She was tired of being bullied by Reggie's parents, as tired as Josh was of being bullied by their son. Reggie's family moved shortly before the order was finalized. Josh never saw him again and was happier for it. We're still alive, absolutely. Not for much longer though. I think we've about hit our limit here. Josh watched his mother walk up the front walk now, Lily in her arms as she sleepily held on to her sack of candy. She was stumbling on the way back. I think we're going to have some cocoa if you'd like some. Give me a few more minutes, Mom. I think he's just running late this year. Mom smiled. Take all the time you need, dear. She walked inside, leaving him alone on the stoop. The street was empty, only a few stragglers heading for home, and Josh glanced around furtively. Where was Snarf? Had he forgotten about his old friend? 20 years was a long time to visit somebody who wasn't exactly a kid anymore. Maybe he had. Josh dropped the bowl of candy when that ghostly cold nose pressed against his hand. He looked down to find Snarf, tail wagging, as he smiled up at him from the front lawn of the house that he had loved so much. Josh wrapped his arms around him, and it felt like coming home again. And that was Halloween Visitors. Well, I'm slowly losing my voice, guys, so I think that's going to be the last story for us tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed my little pre-Halloween story time. I was tickled pink to see all of you guys show up. I'm always afraid I'm going to be doing one of these like I used to do on TikTok, and I'm just reading to myself for 2 hours. Oh, it's always nice to see you guys. Hopefully you'll come to my next one. I'm sure I'll see a few of you. Until then, it's been a real gas. I appreciate you guys stopping by. I appreciate everyone who gave super chats and donated. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And from the bottom of my heart, happy Halloween, guys. We'll see you next time. Dr. Plague signing off. Have a wonderful evening.